Thank you so much for inviting me here today to speak about one of the most important issues imaginable, the importance of and struggle for religious freedom both here in America and throughout the world. When Father Ed asked me to speak at this gathering, I hesitated. You probably remember. What could I add to a discussion of religious freedom, a topic that certainly fills the news with talking heads on a daily basis now? But my life has indeed intersected with the issue of religious liberty at many points, and perhaps my witness can help provide some insight and guidance into ways to proceed from this point in order to preserve religious freedom. So let me share with you some of my perspective based on my observations as the son of immigrants coming to this country for liberty, as a physician who practiced in a secular hospital, as a Maryland state senator who co-chaired the pro-life caucus, and most recently as a congressman in the eye of the storm. And I'll leave you with 4 thoughts tonight. Well, to begin, let's all remember that religious liberty in America is frequently called our first liberty, not only because it's the first one mentioned in the Bill of Rights, but because of its truly fundamental nature in human history, and especially American history. America was settled by those seeking to practice their religious beliefs. Remember the Puritans at Plymouth Rock, religious beliefs that were not accepted in their native countries. Many of our states were founded on that principle, and we have come to accept it as normal and even take it for granted. But in an era where we watch beheadings of Christians in the Middle East and the destruction of synagogues in Europe even to this day, it's important to remember that 70% of the world's population still live in countries without religious freedom. In some instances with only subtle discrimination, in other instances outright hostility. But here in America, our founders, even though not all fervent believers in their own lives, recognize the importance of the state not establishing religion nor interfering in the exercise of religion. James Madison in 1784, before the Constitution was written, in a reaction to a bill proposed by Patrick Henry in the Virginia legislature that would have given preference to Christianity, wrote a treatise called Memorial and Remonstrance Against Religious Assessments. In it he wrote, quote, "The religion of every man must be left to the conviction and conscience of every man to exercise as they may dictate. This right is by its very nature an inalienable right," end quote. This is the essence of religious freedom, allowing all to practice their religious beliefs as they alone see fit, not as others or the state see fit. How significant that in the infancy of our nation, the right to exercise one's, quote, "conviction and conscience" was held up as an inalienable, a word not used coincidentally to describe those rights which were not conferred on humankind by the state, but by our Creator in the very Declaration of Independence. Now, it was to this country and this rich heritage that my parents fled after World War II. My mother, the daughter of an Eastern Rite Ukrainian Catholic priest, grew up in Poland, where Catholicism was a state-protected religion, but where during the war, the occupying Nazis and then the Soviets routinely persecuted and killed Jews and Catholics. After the war, the area where she grew up became part of the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic, and all religions were suppressed and driven underground. I'll always remember when my cousin, whom I had never seen before, visited his aunt, my mother, in America in the early 1990s after the fall of the Iron Curtain. Perhaps out of habit, one day he asked me in a whisper if I was, quote, "a believer." I learned from my mother that this was the code word used in communist Ukraine to identify those who shared the underground Christian faith. How unusual, I thought, that this had to be kept a secret in order to keep safe from the government. Likewise, my father fled Hungary, a country which prior to World War II was known for its religious tolerance, but which during and after the war witnessed the persecution of many, especially Jews. To many Americans, the atrocities suffered as a result of religious beliefs seem unimaginable and far off. But to me, growing up, hearing these stories made them seem all too real. And recently, it's even real in countries that would surprise us. Tony Miano, a street preacher who was a former LA County Sheriff Department chaplain, was arrested in London for preaching about the homosexual lifestyle being sinful. That was his offense. Or in Canada, the Supreme Court recently finding William Whatcott guilty of a hate crime for distributing street flyers against homosexual acts. Most worrisome for people of faith who believe that you hate the sin and love the sinner, the Supreme Court of Canada asserted that you couldn't separate hatred of the act from hatred of the person. That's worrisome. And here's my first point for the evening. Religious persecution is in fact not the exception worldwide, it is the rule. Human history is filled with examples of it, and we must realize that this struggle is real, it is existential in many circumstances, and it will likely never end in human history, and certainly not in our lifetimes. We have to be in this for the long haul. Let me move on to talk briefly about my observations as a physician working in a secular hospital. I'm an anesthesiologist and an obstetric anesthesiologist by subspecialty training. It was always interesting to me working on the labor and delivery suite, delivering babies, some as young as 23 weeks of pregnancy, while down the hall second trimester abortions were being performed. In that environment, in the beginning of my career, it was extremely important to me that Maryland had and continues to have a strong conscience protection law for healthcare workers in hospitals. By law, we could not be forced to participate in certain medical actions or procedures that would violate our beliefs. This protection, interestingly, is not uniform and varies from state to state. When I was an anesthesiologist in the military, it also became clear to me that such protections are necessary, if not even more so. There was a constant effort, thankfully unsuccessful, starting in the 1990s, to bring abortions into military hospitals. But if that had ever occurred, military medical personnel could then potentially be under orders to violate their conscience, with refusal to obey having serious career advancement repercussions. Fortunately, 2 years ago, Congress further strengthened our conscience rights in the military, most recently made necessary over the right to express one's religious belief on the part of chaplains regarding same-sex marriage. This leads me to my second observation for the evening, that conscience protection laws are very important if we look to secular authority to help protect our religious rights, as we frequently have to. When conflicting, quote, rights, and I put that in quotes because someone put the right to abortion and same-sex marriage on the same plane as the right to religious freedom. But when those conflicting rights must be balanced before secular law, conscience protection laws are the only way to secure those religious rights, whether it's over the right to refuse to participate in abortions, or the right to refuse to participate in a same-sex so-called marriage ceremony. George Washington, in his letter as president in 1790, written to the Touro Synagogue, the oldest synagogue in the nation in Newport, Rhode Island, said, quote, talking about American citizens, quote, all possess alike liberty of conscience and immunity of citizenship, end quote. Powerful words that summarize the importance in insisting that governments guarantee conscience protection. But the recent attempt in Indiana to extend and strengthen conscience protection and religious freedom point out that it is no longer easy to guarantee those protections in an increasingly secular world, and that it is felt that somehow political compromise has a place in those guarantees. But how do you compromise with a conscience? Let's move on to my experience as a Maryland State Senator, where I co-chaired the pro-life caucus with Senator Norman Stone from Dundalk. We had many, many issues, as you could imagine, that dealt in some way with faith-based issues before the legislature, whether it was abortion, euthanasia, gay rights, or stem cell research. Let me just deal with one of those issues. I always say that the accomplishment I was most proud of during my 12 years in the Senate was the successful threat to filibuster public funding of embryonic stem cell research in 2004. At the time, California and Massachusetts had set up a public funding mechanism, and Maryland was to be the third domino to fall, setting up many other states to follow. But our bipartisan pro-life caucus held together that year and stopped the embryonic stem cell bill. And the failure of that bill in Maryland that year stopped the momentum nationwide. That could only have been accomplished with the incredible sacrifice of 6 members on the other side of the aisle who stood with their convictions and stood up to their party and their party's leadership in order to help me kill that bill. Now, I naively thought that we could hold it off forever, but the bill did indeed pass next year after 2 of our senators, both Catholic, by the way, left our filibuster coalition. One because he was up for re-election in Montgomery County in a, quote, pro-choice district and was afraid he would be defeated in a primary, which he was anyway. And another as a result of making a deal to gain a small concession in the bill before he agreed to vote for it. It was just too hard to stand up to the political pressure. Which brings me to my third point of the evening. Never, ever depend solely on politicians to protect your religious rights. At the end of the day, political considerations trump religious convictions for far too many. And that's exactly why those rights are embedded in our Constitution. But as the most recent Supreme Court ruling on same-sex marriage proved, even the Constitution can be perverted to restrict rights. When we consider whether the survival of Christianity and Christian beliefs will depend upon secular authority, it's good to recall those words of Madison from that 1784 treatise again. He said that Christianity, quote, disavows a dependence on the powers of this world, for it is known that this religion both existed and flourished, not only without the support of human laws, but in spite of every opposition from them. Madison was right. Christianity doesn't and shouldn't ever depend on support from secular government for its survival. Now, being in Congress for the last 4.5 years during the ongoing attack on religious liberty by this administration has been truly eye-opening. But the struggle is far from lost. In reaction to these assaults, there have been numerous grassroots efforts to preserve our freedom, which have been successful, all of which share one thing in common: persons with deeply held religious beliefs willing to sacrifice all. Remember the Chick-fil-A boycott in 2012 over CEO Dan Cathy's public opposition to same-sex marriage? It was for saying, quote, I think we're inviting God's judgment on our nation when we shake our fist at him and say, we know better than you as to what constitutes a marriage. Now that boycott actually turned into a national boycott in which many of you probably participated, as did my family. In fact, a Rasmussen national survey in August of that year found that 61% of Americans held a favorable view of Chick-fil-A, with only 13% indicating they would participate in a boycott. Or how about Phil Robertson of Duck Dynasty, the A&E network threatening to cancel his appearance on the show after his comments? How quickly they reversed the decision when the public spoke up. Or the Houston mayor who last year subpoenaed 5 pastors' sermons on homosexuality to try to find a crime to charge them with, and then reversed her decision after a groundswell of complaints. Or Memories Pizza. That was the restaurant in Indiana that came to national attention earlier this year after the Indiana religious freedom law fight, when the media went out and tried to find a caterer that would refuse to cater a same-sex wedding for religious reasons. When they couldn't find one, they asked the owners of Memories Pizza, a business run by a Christian family, who said they wouldn't cater one, never mind that no pizza parlor would ever be asked to cater a wedding. When they were threatened with boycott and closure by the same-sex marriage lobby, they raised $800,000 online from Christians nationwide who supported their beliefs. Or how about Hobby Lobby? I had the opportunity to go visit with the Green family, owners of Hobby Lobby, in their Oklahoma City offices. It was a pleasure to meet David Green, the patriarch of the family, the founder of the business. David was the epitome of the American dream. He started Hobby Lobby as a framing business in his garage with a $300 investment and grew it into one of the largest hobby and crafts companies in the world. The family was well renowned for taking care of their workers. I saw it firsthand, providing them health insurance as well as an actual health facility on the company campus in Oklahoma City, where not only the workers could go, but they could bring their families for $25 to see the doctor, have all the lab tests and studies done for $25. So you can imagine their surprise when they were told they would be in violation of the Affordable Care Act with their insurance policy because they didn't want to cover abortifacient emergency contraception pills. They didn't give in. If you met them, you'd understand how deeply they hold their Christian principles. David Green said he would close the doors of his company and forego the profitable business before he would give in. And I believe him. The Green family persisted in court battle after court battle and finally prevailed in the Supreme Court in their challenge to Obamacare, going up against the federal Leviathan and winning. David, quite literally, against Goliath. And that's my fourth observation and last one for the evening. It's grassroots level pushback by believers unwilling to yield their beliefs for the sake of convenience or comfort or acceptance that will lead to prevailing against these hostile secular winds. The Green family of Hobby Lobby, or the Cathy family of Chick-fil-A, or Phil Robertson, or the owners of Memories Pizza have to be our example for standing up for your belief in the face of ridicule and even ruin. It's said by an unknown but wise source early in the 19th century in America, soon after the founding of our nation, that, quote, "Eternal vigilance is the price of liberty. Let the sentinels on the watchtower sleep not and slumber not," end quote. Ladies and gentlemen, with regard to the current assault on our religious liberty, we are the sentinels. It is our watch. Sleep not and slumber not.